There can be no defence in a nuclear war. There can be no targeted nuclear attack. The world needs to wake up. There is no safety and no security in having nuclear weapons. Hiroshima Day is a very poignant day. We remember the day when nuclear weapons were first used, that killed hundreds of thousands in Hiroshima and a few days later in Nagasaki, and left a residue of cancerous material which took the lives of thousands in subsequent decades. We also remember the effects of the nuclear tests in Russia, in the United States, in the Pacific, and in so many places around the world. We remember those that suffered because of the nuclear arms race. So surely, at a time when the world is moving in ever greater danger, we should embrace two things. One, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, subject to review this year in New York, and embrace it and support it and adhere to it, which requires the declared nuclear weapon states to take steps towards disarmament. We should also support the global ban movement. The majority of the world's countries have signed the Global Ban Treaty. Why can't we do the same? Because there can be no defence in a nuclear war. There can be no targeted nuclear attack. It is an indiscriminate attack by a weapon of mass destruction that will kill millions of people. The world needs to wake up. There is no safety and no security in having nuclear weapons. Only safety and security can come from disarmament and from peace. We're faced with a terrible war in the Ukraine. We're faced with terrible wars in other places. All wars end in a peace conference. All wars end in negotiation. I absolutely condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I also want those that condemn it to use the language of peace, to use the language of negotiation to bring about a long-term peace. That surely has to be our objective. We support Ukrainian refugees coming to Britain, as we do every other country. Of course we do, and that's the right thing to do. We should support refugees coming from the war in Yemen or so many other places in exactly the same way. Let's dedicate ourselves today, August the 6th, to build that world of peace.
Destroyed, where we buried the ashes of the ones that we loved. There the green grass grows and the white waving weeds. Deadly the harvest of two atom bombs. Then brothers and sisters, you must watch and take care that the third atom bomb never comes. Gentle rain gathers poison from the sky, and the fish carry death in the depths of the sea. Fishing boats are idle, their owners are blind. Deadly the harvest of two atom bombs. Then landsmen and seamen, you must watch and take care that the third atom bomb never comes. All that people have created with their hands and their minds for the glory of the world we live in. Now it can be smashed in a moment, destroyed. Deadly the harvest of two atom bombs. Then brothers and sisters, you must watch and take care that the third atom bomb never comes. Then people of the world, you must watch and take care that the third atom bomb never comes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I wonder if shouting is actually better than the microphone, but maybe I could just encourage everyone to take 3 steps forwards.
Try again and increase the volume.
Increase the volume. Can those at the back hear me? Give me a wave. Thank you. Is that better? Wonderful. Thank you again so much to the Raised Voices Choir, who every year come and sing these beautiful songs to help us to remember what happened on this day 77 years ago. I just wanted to briefly maybe introduce today's event by saying that, you know, we're here to commemorate the 6th of August 1945, when the US dropped an atomic bomb on a civilian population for the first time, killing thousands in Hiroshima and devastating the city. As we know, 3 days later, they dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki, killing thousands more. And today, we're here to remember the people whose lives were taken or were forever changed by this evil act. We're here to renew our commitment to campaigning for nuclear disarmament together. This, for me, was made more personal when I travelled in 2019 to Hiroshima, and I attended the Hiroshima Peace Memorial and Lantern Floating Ceremony as CND's delegate to the World Conference Against A&H Bombs. And I visited Hibakusha, who are the survivors of the nuclear bombs, in specialist hospitals, and it was very moving to hear their stories, and in fact I found it deeply affecting. And really, you know, my time there made me see the responsibility that we all hold in order to take over that campaigning work from the Hibakusha, who are now of advanced age, when they experienced this 77 years ago, and some of them still have that forever imprinted in their memory and have been suffering for many years from the after effects of this. And so now it's our time to, you know, show them that we are ready to take the baton and to continue this important work. Some of the things that I experienced in Hiroshima and that I learnt about was, you know, the other devastating effects that resulted from the bomb, not just the complete obliteration of the city, but also the stigma that some people faced due to the misinformation about radiation sickness as being contagious. I also heard about living in fear of illnesses developing in later life, and really the scale of tragic loss and heartbreak. But the Hibakusha, they don't bury these memories deep inside themselves, despite the pain that remembering must cost them. But instead they continue to campaign, and they vow to do so until the world has been rid of nuclear weapons. We must continue this mission. 77 years have passed since the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and yet there's still 13,000 nuclear warheads all over the world, owned by 9 countries. And each warhead is of course far more powerful than the warheads that existed in 1945. In 2001, whilst the global pandemic was raging and the NHS was of course desperately underfunded, then the UK government saw it as appropriate to then announce, or, you know, not really very publicly announce from what I remember, but try and sneak in the fact that they were now going to increase the UK's nuclear arsenal by 44%. They've not disclosed the cost to the public purse, but given that Trident costs, or Trident replacement costs, an astronomical £205 billion, I can only imagine what increasing the nuclear arsenal by 44% will actually cost. And this all reminds me of a scene in Yes, Prime Minister, where Sir Humphrey is kind of gleefully explaining that we're going to buy Trident from the Americans, and he says excitedly, "But with Trident we can obliterate the whole of Eastern Europe." And Jim Hacker says, "I don't want to obliterate the whole of Eastern Europe. I don't think any of us want to obliterate the whole of Eastern Europe, and therefore let's not renew Trident. There is still time to stop this." Increasing the amount of nuclear weapons that the UK holds is a direct breach as well of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which the UK is a signatory to. It's a treaty in which the UK have committed to preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and furthering the goal to achieve nuclear disarmament. To add to this, and Kate Hudson has come to speak to us more about this, the US Department of Defence is once again looking to store nuclear weapons in the UK. We hope that everyone who's gathered here today will join us to protest this on the 17th of September at RAF Lakenheath. We want to, like we did in 2008, send US nukes packing. So our programme today includes speeches and cultural contributions, and I'm delighted to introduce Councillor Nasim Ali, Mayor of Camden, for the Mayor's opening address, followed by which there'll be the traditional laying of the wreath.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to join you here at Tavistock Square in Camden, which I believe is a unique garden for the commemoration of peace and humanity. Cherry trees have been planted in public places around the world to remember the people killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. We remember Councillor Millie Miller, who planted this cherry tree in memory of the hundreds of thousands of deaths caused by the atom bomb dropped on this day in 1945 on Hiroshima, and that dropped 3 days later on Nagasaki. Almost every year since, the Mayor of Camden has been asked to speak at this annual event, and I am proud to take my turn in doing so. The nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was inhumane, and we must never allow it to happen again. I believe in peace and unity. Unity is strength and brings happiness and joy, compared to war, which brings sadness and tears. As Mayor of Camden, I am proud to say that we celebrate diversity, and we have over 160 languages spoken in Camden. We're also proud of how all the different communities are represented in our borough, and how we have learned to work together in peace and harmony. This year we're remembering both the 77th anniversary of the atom bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the 108th anniversary of the start of First World War. At the time of World War I, it was described as the war to end all wars. However, in spite of the millions of people killed and injured and the immense destruction of that war, it has not proved to be so. A mere 21 years later, another world war broke out, which brought death and destruction on a vast scale to civilian areas, and included horrors such as the Holocaust, the bombing of such cities as Coventry and Dresden, but also the first use of nuclear weapons, in which 2 bombs caused the premature deaths of 250,000 people in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And as I said to someone earlier, I think that still goes on because it just damages the soil, and it will probably never stop. People are still being hurt by the nuclear bombs that were dropped. But still, the lesson was not learned, and there have been almost continuous wars since 1945, and yet many millions of people being killed and injured, and now in Ukraine too. So far, at least, no more nuclear weapons have been used in these wars, but if we can't put an end to war, then there is no guarantee that this will be the case. Let us do all we can to promote peace and unity in Camden, in London, and all over the world. So today, it's great for me and my consort, Councillor Nasim Ali, to be here with you and to remember the people who sadly were killed, lost their lives, and the damage that was caused to their families, the damage that was caused to Japan, and the damage that nuclear weapons do, and that any wars cause. And I was speaking earlier to some people here who have a lot of passion for Camden, who have a lot of passion for humanity, and I think there's obviously, I know that CND has got a great campaign, but obviously, you know, there's different feelings in terms of the way it could go forward. But I think for us here today, we are proud of what you're doing, and we're proud to be here with you and to actually remember the people. And as Mayor of Camden, I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to follow the mayor now to that tree where we're going to lay the wreath and follow the wreath. So maybe everyone could turn, and that could happen. Thank you.
The other side on the plaque, please. Thank you.
way now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I am honored to be here today to mark the 77th Hiroshima Day ceremony with a short prayer. The late Bruce Kent loved the following word of the founder of our order, Fujiguruji. Civilization is neither to have electric light, nor airplanes, nor to produce nuclear bombs. Civilization is not to kill man, not to destroy things, not to make war. Civilization is to hold mutual affection and to respect each other. A prayer for peace.
Thank you so much for praying with us. I wanted to as well thank the Mad Hatters group. You'll have seen on the entry to the park and all around, there's these peace cranes strung up. and they're a beautiful symbol which reminds us of Hiroshima. And so thank you very much for all of your efforts on coming to decorate the park and tell more people who are passing by on the street why we're here today. We now move on to a section of speeches, and we're going to begin with a message from Jeremy Corbyn MP, who's usually with us, but he called us 5 minutes ago to again apologise for not being able to be with us today. He is, of course, commemorating Hiroshima Day, but he's doing so from Wales, where he is at an event with CND in Wales. But Carol Turner, who is the London CND co-chair, is going to read out a message that he sent to us, which is just here.
Oh, thanks. Lovely to see you all again, and it's so nice to be here on such a summer day. Jeremy, as many of you know, is always a regular attender at these meetings. He took a gap year before he went to university many years ago and travelled around Central America, and that's where he is today in Wales, celebrating Central American solidarities with people. He says, "My thanks for inviting me to this special anniversary event of the use of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. And my sincere apologies that I can't be here in person to join this commemoration. The hundreds of thousands who died in 1949 were followed by many more deaths from nuclear fallout and cancers in the decades that followed. As the nuclear arms race accelerated with the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and later China acquiring their own nuclear weapons, testing followed. Much of this testing was done in the Pacific, but also in the Soviet Union and the USA. The testing also created nuclear destruction, fallout, death of soldiers used as guinea pigs, and civilians who had no notion of what was happening. The peace movement around the world grew in an attempt to both stop the spread of these appalling weapons and to bring about nuclear disarmament in the countries that possess them. This led to the agreement on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is under review this month at the United Nations in New York. There are growing tensions in the world in this century. The resolution of those wars, the residue of those wars has been poverty, destitution, terrorism and hunger. The appalling decision of Russia to invade Ukraine, an event I unequivocally condemn, as does CND, and have done on numerous occasions, has led to new tensions, more loss of life and new instability. The nuclear ban movement for a nuclear-free world is supported by a majority of the member states of the United Nations. Not that the British media has given much prominence to that. Our government and that of other declared nuclear weapons states have all increased nuclear warheads after decades of reduction. The 9 states which possess nuclear weapons are a minority in the court of world opinion. On this anniversary of Hiroshima, let's resolve to use the language of peace and to try and bring ceasefire and peace to the people of Ukraine and Russia and the other conflicts around the world, such as Yemen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. I'm now going to introduce someone who, of course, needs no introduction. Welcome, Kate Hudson, General Secretary of CND.
Thanks very much, Hannah, and thanks to London Region CND for putting on this fantastic event every year. Mr. Mayor, friends, it's so good to see you here today, I know that we're all very, very alert to the increasing nuclear dangers that we face, which of course makes CND's work more important than ever. And we are striving to do that, to be effective alongside international partners across the peace movement internationally. And one of the points which Jeremy made just then in his message was to remind us that, of course, we are part of the global majority. Sometimes we may feel assailed because of the things we hear and see in the media and so on, the rhetoric that comes from our government, but we know we are part of the global majority, and we can celebrate the victories and achievements of that global majority. Not only the fact that the entire global south is covered by nuclear weapons-free zones, but of course also that at the beginning of last year the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was ratified. So the overwhelming majority, not only of peoples, but of states too, are opposed to nuclear weapons and are working for their eradication. Now, of course, it's a great sadness to us all, a matter for anger as well, that our government is one of the key offenders when it comes to retaining nuclear weapons. Not only continuing with replacing Trident, but of course, as has already been said by Hannah so eloquently, committing to increasing our nuclear arsenal by up to 44%. And of course also we now know from earlier this year that the US is sending nuclear bombs back to RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk. Now these two developments, these terrible proliferatory developments, are things that we are going to work might and main to prevent and reverse. That is our great task. Now this week, and in fact for the whole of the month, the NPT Review Conference is taking place in New York, as Jeremy mentioned in his message. What we know so far are two things, completely contradictory. First, the marvellous statement by the UN Secretary General alerting us, calling on the global community to oppose nuclear weapons and get rid of them because of the great dangers. And he said, we can't rely on luck. Luck is not a strategy for preventing nuclear war. We have to take action. So that was on the one side. On the other side, the UK's own governmental statement to the conference, where it was like they were in a fantasy land. They congratulated the UK themselves for reducing nuclear weapons over the decades. Not a word about the increase, not a word about the nukes coming back to Lakenheath. And in fact, CND we had an online fringe meeting earlier in the week where the so-called disarmament ambassador of the UK to the UN was present, and he claimed to know nothing about the US nukes coming back to Lakenheath. So I was pleased to send him the copies of the questions and answers put in Parliament, which make it quite clear that this is happening. So a lot for us to do, friends, a huge amount. We are not alone in doing it, and we will continue to do it until we have success and ultimately the peace-loving peoples of the world will prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you. I'm afraid I have to send apologies from our next speaker, who is Jess Barnard from Young Labour, but she's unfortunately feeling really unwell this morning, so she's not able to join us. I am very happy, though, to introduce Benali Hamdache, who joins us again this year from the Green Party, and this time we're going to hear a bit about the impact of war on migration. Thank you very much for joining us.
Brilliant. It's a real pleasure to join you again this year on a really summery day, and lovely to see the cranes and all the contributions today. So we're gathered here in remembrance and respect of a terrible moment in history, a terrible war, an awful atrocity. Fueled by greed, nationalism and hatred, the world collided. Millions died, millions injured, millions displaced. We say, never forget, that we must learn the lessons of history, but the world is forgetting. We see a new level of strife in the world. Nationalism still fuels war and kills civilians. Weapons of unbelievable damage are dropped upon homes, families and children. There are nearly 90 million refugees in the world today, almost 90 million people driven out of their homes through war and violence. After World War II, there was a civic determination to put the world back together, to atone for the Holocaust, to rebuild broken countries, to build a better future. We need to remind our elected representatives to recapture that spirit, to channel Attlee and the FDR and the other leaders of the world at that time, to know that a refugee is not our enemy, to know that opening the door to those in need is the kindest act, to remember the horrors of war and the ease that mass destruction can be released upon the world. Hiroshima and Nagasaki should have been the lessons that should have been the days that we put away nuclear weapons away forever. The Holocaust should have been when we learned the dangers of fascism and race hatred. We need to come together to remind the world of the dangers of both. To a resurgent far right, to empires building more bombs, to the oppression and killing of groups across the world, from the Rohingya to the Palestinians, to the Yemenis, to the Syrians, to the Ukrainians. The search for peace is not a naive one. It is the only common sense answer in this world. And the goal of a world where no one is driven out of their home is a worthy one too. And until we get there, we should find the space and the resource to find those safe refuges, to give displaced people succour and hope. We can come together in that hope. We are powerful. We have our shared voice. Together we shall overcome.
Thank you. I feel now that we should all sing "We Shall Overcome," but I'm afraid that I'm appalling at singing, so I won't lead that, but anyone's welcome to after the event. Oh, I've made it happen. I think we will move on actually to tributes to Bruce Kent, which John Morris is going to give unless we are now singing.
Thanks very much. Most of the people here and many of the people who know Bruce will know that he would speak here each year, and the last time he spoke was at the Conscientious Objection celebration on the 15th of May. It's very important to remember that Bruce was a person for everybody, and that he would have been 93 in June of this year. I have looked through his obituaries, through his comments, through everything about him, and found that he was just one of these people who we are so lucky to have been around when he was around. He was the Vice President of CND, the Vice President of Pax Christi, and the Emeritus Professor of the Movement for Abolition of War. He was conscripted to the army in 47-49 and worked in the tank regiment. He, for 3 years, was educated at Brasenose College and later became a Catholic priest after 6 years of training. That was from 1952 till 58. He became a secretary to Cardinal John Heenan, and for 8 years he was the Catholic chaplain at the University of London. He was chair of War on Want for 2 years. In 1960 he joined the Christian Campaign CND and was General Secretary from 80 to 85. I can go through the enormous amount of things about him and what he did, but I think we have to understand that he was part of so many organizations, from Palestine Solidarity through everything that one could think of. It was written in a book at the time of his work that, in fact, he had seen the world from not the corridors of power, but from freezing fences outside Greenham Common, Molesworth, etc., etc. He got into trouble from the Catholic Church because he condemned a chaplain for blessing a Polaris submarine leaving the Dunoon base on its maiden voyage, and he got into trouble for that. He was a brilliant speaker, much better than myself. He thought quickly, and he was very aware of how to entertain and make life interesting for people as far as speaking. One of the great things he did was walking from Warsaw to Brussels. I remember reading of that. He was obviously the person who changed CND and moved CND from being a rather small organization to one that had real power and influence. In fact, at one point, the Today program, I think in in 83, he was elected Man of the Year, and the woman that was elected as Woman of the Year by the Today program was Margaret Thatcher. So one wonders how he got on with that. I read various things that people had said about him. One thing that Ken Livingstone had said was that he was the nicest guy he had ever met. He was such a pleasure to work with. Bruce never said unpleasant things about anybody, and he was here to make the world a better place. I noticed as well that there's 3 portraits of Bruce Kent in the National Portrait Gallery. One is a painting that was done in 92-93. Another one was a photograph of him in 85, and another was a photograph in 2004. And of course these are available to anybody who wants to go and have a look and order them. He got really involved with CND. The famous story goes that he was waiting for brides and people to come to a wedding, and he found that they were being delayed because there was a large demonstration, and of course that large demonstration was a CND demonstration in 63. And also he had an incident with Cardinal Heenan when they were waiting for Heenan's chauffeur to come, and the chauffeur was being held up in traffic, and Bruce Kent said to Heenan, "What do you think about nuclear weapons and bombs, etc.?" And of course Heenan said those magic words concisely, which is, "It's better to be dead than red." And these were things that made Bruce think of the Catholic Church as not being necessarily on his side. But he remained a Catholic, and he gave up being a practicing minister, but he remained a Catholic. And he still celebrated Mass before going to work at CND. He was a person who never looked back. He was a gentleman, somebody who was mild-mannered, who loved and didn't suffer fools gladly. He was willing to talk to everybody, and he was obviously very willing to talk truth to power. I think one has to remember that he went through an enormously difficult time, and he was very much pillared and made a fool of by Heseltine and various other people, and it'd be so interesting to talk to Heseltine now and ask him what he thought of Bruce Kent, because he was really pillared in a terrible way. One of the reasons that I had to do with Bruce more than most other people was when I was about 16, 17 in Glasgow. I was in YCND, and a Labour Party MP, whose name I've forgotten, came to see us, and he brought a copy of a book called War Against War, and this was published in 1924. I was really amazed by it and never forgot it, and in the 70s I then bought another copy of it, which I had never seen before. It was a poor copy. It was a copy that photographs and pictures were not very clear. I felt the horror of 1914 celebrations coming along, and I thought it was very important to have a book that showed the horrors of the First World War available. I had spoken to many different people and said, is there any way we can get this published, any way we can make it available for people so that they can see what war is really about? I spoke to Bruce. Bruce said, my goodness, I've never seen this book before. He contacted the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation, and eventually it was published. I've taken from the foreword of the book that he wrote, I've got these words here, which were written in 2014, and I'll read them to you. He says, War Against War is one of the most shocking books I have ever seen. As a series of photographs, it's more than that. It appeared in 1924, the work of Ernst Friedrich, an anarchist, socialist, internationalist and peace worker. But this is not just a picture book. It begins and ends with a passionate plea to understand the causes of war and to take steps to prevent it, and is addressed to human beings in all lands. Unite and work for world peace is Friedrich's plea, made especially to the mothers of the world. Was Friedrich's call for the end of war a waste of wind? Not at all. The United Nations Charter, which was eventually signed in 1945, according to the preamble of that charter, the first aims of this new international institution was to do what he wanted, quote, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. We have made at least a little progress. Conscientious objection is now largely recognized as a human right, though it's not right granted in many countries. The 16,000 plus UK conscientious objectors of the First World War did not suffer in vain. But so many of the attitudes which Friedrich denounces in the book War Against War are still around. Parts of the press can and still do whip up nationalist fervour and persuade people to believe in grossly exaggerated threats. Though this history continues to dominate, the arms seller and the defence firms still have a baneful effect on public policy. Profits still count wherever it comes from. The weapons of today, landmines, depleted uranium shells, etc., continue to kill long after wars are over. With the energy and vision of Ernst Friedrich, we can move far further towards ending war than we have yet managed. To spend trillions a year on war and weapons as we do today, when billions of people live in abject poverty, is a scandal. I hope so much that this timely edition of War Against War will make many more people determined to bring that scandal to an end. Bruce wrote that on February 14, and I think one has to also remember that Bruce would have taken on the ideas and some of the thoughts of Joe Hill. Joe Hill was supposed to have said, we mustn't mourn, we must organise. And of course I would like to end with what Valerie, his widow, said at the time of his funeral, the concluding tribute that she said. She said, what a man, what a voice, what a friend, what a lot of love. We give thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you. I feel that some of us may need a moment, and so whilst we take that moment, I'll invite Neil Pilkington to the stage, and he's going to read a poem for us that he has written himself. Thank you, Neil.
I've written it myself. That sounds funny. So my name is not Bill Clinton, but it is Neil Pilkington. And I was hardly a year old when the United Mistakes of America dropped 2 horrific bombs on human people. Isn't that amazing? The United Mistakes of America? Homing in on Homo sapiens, dedicated to atomic detonation, atom meant as atonement, why we become the shadow of an abomination, of a bombed nation. From little boy to fat man to no man's land, in a nanosplit second. Elimination by illumination. Oblivion. On this no man ever reckoned. the splicing of the atom, the icing on that sliced cake, the eye seeing blinding light. Man, ever asleep, invites his own wake. Better look up to the brilliant light from our revolving nuclear sun, locking on to love's nucleus, that fear-dissolving dawn chorus, bird song, bird song, bird song. Thank you all for having come along. That's the end of the poem. It is amazing that there are almost no children here. Yet we are here to save the children. Where are they? Why, they're on holidays, probably. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We're going to have an announcement now from Shigeo Kobayashi from Japanese Against Nuclear, also a long-standing CND activist. Shigeo.
Thank you, Hannah. My announcement is very short, which is that on 9th, the Nagasaki Day, Tuesday evening, we'll have a peace walk from Westminster Cathedral to Battersea Park Peace Pagoda. And people who, of course, cannot walk that distance can take alternatively bus. You have to change once at the Sloane Square area, but we're in advance of walkers. Anyway, what I have to say in short is that today in Japan, 8:15 at Hiroshima, they had a huge ceremony, 77th ceremony. That is rather sad that we have to still have remembrance ceremony for those who got killed and who still survive as a hibakusha. And as somebody say here, CND has failed. We believe everybody failed to really keep up peaceful world without nuclear weapons. That's all up to us to make up our mind and take action to stop any sources of nuclear weapons. Nuclear energy as well is causing a lot of problems all over the world wherever nuclear reactors are operating. It's never clean and safe energy. It is damaging industry. And of course, by having nuclear reactors working, you are creating the source for nuclear weapons. And who can stop that? We have to take action to stop it. Whatever step we take, it is for our future generation. That is my message. Anyway, do join us for peace walk or peace ride to Battersea Park. Start 7:30. And then around 8:30 we'll be at the Peace Pagoda in Battersea Park. And there we have a little ceremony to remember Nagasaki incidents. Nuclear weapon exploded there too after 3 days of Hiroshima bombing. Now, it is very, very important. Whatever age you are, you keep up the spirit to say against nuclear weapons and the nuclear energy. It is very essential. World is changing under climate changes, And so, whatever you say, whatever you think, whatever way you live, we have to live according to our belief that we have to economize whatever energy we use. And whatever life you live, do live clean way. Take very simple step that you are not leaving this environment to nuclear-free world. Nuclear-free world comes from our mind, our mindset, and it is important that you believe in yourself, that we continue whatever way we can make for the world peace without nuclear weapons.
Thank you very much. I want to as well say thank you to a few people for making this event possible today. Thank you so much to Julie Samonge, our London CND worker who works incredibly hard behind the scenes to do all kinds of things to make our activities possible. So I think big round of applause to Julie, please. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the faithful National CND who have been standing behind us holding the banner and have brought all this heavy stuff along with them, so thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for coming today and for being part of this commemoration ceremony with us. We will be here next year and the year after, so please put this day as a recurring calendar event in your, if you have a question perhaps you could field it via Julie.
Just very simply, is it 7:30 in the morning or 7:30 in the evening?
It's what, 7:30? For the walk. The walk is 7:30 in the evening, yes. Yes, so 6:30 at Westminster Cathedral, 7:30 outside Westminster Cathedral for the walk, and then at 8:30 we should be at the London Peace Pagoda. Also 17th of September, join us. We are booking a coach to travel together if you'd like to RAF Lakenheath. There's some flyers on the bench over there. You can ask me and Julie about how to book the coach if you are not already on our mailing list. And thanks again to Mad Hatters for the peace cranes. And finally, I am very happy that Raised Voices Choir are going to sing us out. And I understand that we're invited to sing along. The song is H-Bomb Thunder. If you have been in the peace movement for any amount of time and you do not yet know the chorus, then I am shocked and surprised. However, we have printed it on your programmes. So, Raised Voices, welcome again, and thank you for joining us.
Alice Quinn Jones. Am I one? No. Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn. I don't know. Well, that must be a good song. Originally, the name came from London. Thank you. I think it was a plantation in Ireland, 16th, 17th century. It's all cooked up. James Bond. Is he still around?
Will you see children die? Men and women stand together. We don't need the men of war. Make your mind up now and never, and the bond forevermore. The leaders of the nation, take the whole. We'll take heed, voice of progress, radiation, strikes at every race and creed. Must you put and find in danger, mother folk in distant lands, will you bring on your hands. Men and women, stand together. Do not heed the men of war. Make your mind up now or never, and the bomb forevermore. Shall we make the world in ruin? Only you can make the choice. Make the choice. Stop and think of what you're doing. What you're doing. Join the march and raise your voice. Raise your voice. Time is short. Time is short. We must be speedy. Must be speedy. We can see the hungry filled. As the homeless and the needy. Shall we blast or shall we build? Men and women, stand together. Do not heed the men of war. Make your minds up now or never, and the bomb forevermore. Men and women, stand together. Do not heed the men of war. Make your minds up now or never, and the bomb forevermore.
I dreamt I saw Joe Hill last night. Hello, where do you want me? I said